What's up, Patreon community? This is our week 4 recap. I want to welcome you guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning in once again. And in this video, we're going to be recapping the games, talking about, diagnosing some of the things that I saw. We're going to be bouncing around to different games, so there's no order here, but there were some big time performances. Like we've seen in weeks past, we've seen some teams rebounding after some tough losses the previous week. Um, Getting back on track. And then there's a couple teams that have had some disappointing performances, probably some really tough film sessions earlier on this week. But let's all dive right into it. And let's go through the games. First one up is a B matchup, Sleepy Hollow at Pearl River. Pearl River won 49-7. That puts them at 3-1. Sleepy Hollow is now at 1-4. And just starting with Sleepy Hollow, excuse me. Evan Bowen is kind of the senior. He's really been carrying the load offensively. He had another solid performance, almost about 4 yards per carry with 82 yards rushing and a touchdown. Also had 2 catches for 21 yards, but finding offense outside of him has been a difficult task for Sleepy Hollow, especially with injuries. And on the defensive side, they've just given up a lot of big plays. And when you look at Pearl River, really starting to figure things out offensively the last couple of weeks. They had 4 players score a touchdown. They had 2 fumble recovery. 2 fumble recovery touchdowns on defense. So you see a lot of different guys. They're making plays on both sides of the ball. Amundsen had a rushing touchdown and fumble recovery for a touchdown, scoring on both ends. Aiden Lee had a fumble recovery for a touchdown. They're also running the ball. Espinal had 2 rushing touchdowns. You also had Davin had a rushing touchdown as well, and Perez rounding it out. So multiple guys contributing on the offensive side of the ball. Defense continuing to make plays for Pearl River. They've been very impressive. They go to 3-1. Let's go to probably one of the biggest matchups of the week. Eastchester at Brewster, and Eastchester winning 21-0. This was a defensive slugfest for a long time. Eastchester goes to 4-1. Brewster drops to 2-2. And looking at Eastchester first, they did have a bunch of penalties here. They really shot themselves on the foot often, but their quarterback Schultz continues to impress. 2 rushing touchdowns, a passing touchdown. McCloskey is kind of the big play threat and the main target for them on the offensive side of the ball. Had a big reception, also 2 INTs, so he made some big plays on the defensive side. Tito was also very impressive in this game, both on defensively and offensively. Made some plays, and Matt Diaz had that long touchdown reception of this offense. He wasn't the main, I'm reading the article when he watched the game. He ended up getting wide open. It wasn't the initial read, but good job by their quarterback and Schultz, kind of going off the first read, seeing him open, delivering it, and they executed, obviously. And when you look at Brewster, listen, they're big up front. They're tough defensively. We talked about them in previous weeks. It was 7-0 in the third quarter, right? So, again, back and forth, but the whole question is going to be offensive. When they get down, how can they generate a lot of offense? There was at times they had opportunities, but could not finish drives. Chase Prazuka had a fumble recovery. Colin Lamaro, he was really impressive in this game too. He makes some play. He's a big time important player for this team on both sides of the football. And defensively, he was all over the field. Now, very strong up the middle. They made it very difficult for Eastchester to run in between the tackle box, but on the outside is when Brewster got hurt defensively. But they just couldn't muster enough offense, couldn't finish drives, and they end up going 2-2, being shut out. Let's go to the next matchup, B matchup, Croton Harmon at Ardsley. And Ardsley winning 28-6. They go to 4-0. Croton Harmon drops to 1-3. And when you look at Croton Harmon, Jacob Jones had a pass and touchdown to Carter Schmidt. And defensively, they have a scrappy group. It's been their most consistent, but they struggled to stop the passing attack. Ardsley hit some big pass plays in this one. And offensively, that's where the inconsistency is. They can't find the consistency offensively yet to match that Ardsley power. But they're a scrappy unit. But Ardsley, again, when you look at them, they've been very, very impressive defensively. Again, shutting teams down, making it difficult for opposing offenses with their guys up front. And their quarterback, Michael Rendy, has been really good. 3 passing touchdowns in this one, all and a rushing touchdown, so contributing 4 touchdowns. Anthony Chenard has kind of been the big main target as a receiver. Big-bodied kid. He had 2 receiving touchdowns. Cole Fiore had the other one. And this defense, 6 points allowed again. This has been a strong defensive unit. They limit a lot of big plays, and they're keeping teams out of the end zone. And another big victory at home. Big AA matchup. Ossining coming off that huge upset against North Rockland at Carmel, and Carmel really dominated. I mean, let's make no mistake about it. They went 35-7. They go to 3-1. Ossining drops to 1-4. And Ossining, they struggled to run the ball consistently. Carmel's got a huge front. They got guys on the back end who can run, and they rallied to the ball very well. They made it very difficult. Now, they had one touchdown run, and then when the backups were in, they had a long run. Then the young man fumbled at the 1 yard line, so that ended that. But they could not pass the ball. I mean, they really struggled to pass the ball when they got slowed up. They tried to do some play action. They tried to do some quick throws, and there just wasn't enough there. It was a lot of pressure. And just not very accurate. They could not execute. When you look at Carmel, you really see the size difference here. And again, when they can stop teams that are pretty one-dimensional trying to run the football, makes it difficult if teams cannot throw on them. So they dominated up front. This linebacking crew and the defensive backs really rallied to the ball. Risley had 10 tackles, 4 tackles for loss. And this offense continues to show that they can run the football. Now, Nunez was 7 of 10, very efficient. He had one bad throw into the red zone, which ended up being an INT. But he had some very impressive runs on this one, including probably a 60-yard touchdown run he had to break multiple tackles. He had 3 rushing touchdowns. Werlew had 47 yards rushing and a touchdown. So Nunez had over 110. Werlew had 47. Venables had 42. And you could see, again, getting over 200 yards rushing. Carmel continues to show with their size and strength up front, they can run on teams. Ryan Abel was the leading receiver for them with 6 receptions, 78 yards. And Navi Dodd, 5 for 5. Again, such a strong special teams player for them. Carmel really back on track. Dominant performances back-to-back weeks. The defense has really showed up since they gave up a lot of points versus Arlington. They have really shown up these last couple weeks and rebounded very well. Another really, really big game in this one. Somers, a matchup at Harrison. Somers ended up winning 21-0, but the score was very close in this one for a long time. And this was a back-and-forth defensive slugfest. But Somers, and I mentioned him previously, trying to get off to faster starts. And I thought they did, but Harrison is a load up front defensively. Their starters are really difficult to move and run the football, and they struggled to do that. But Max Sullivan, he was much more efficient in this game than he was versus Mahopac. I thought he started off much better. He was 16 of 17, super efficient, 204 yards passing, 3 touchdowns. Dean Palazzolo, which is a guy who's continuing to show up and make big plays for this offense, he had 143 yards receiving on 9 receptions. And so they made the big plays that they needed to offensively. It was 7-0 for a while, but they end up closing the door here. But it's this defense that Somers that has been the most dominant, most consistent. Belancia had an INT. Iglesias had an INT. Violante, I believe, had the third one. So they forced 3 INTs. Conti had 11 tackles. Newman had 9 tackles. Cole had a big sack and a huge tackle for loss. Multiple guys making plays on this defense, and that's what they slowed down the Harrison rush attack, forced them to be a throwing team, which is what they're not very comfortable with and could not execute. They did a good job preventing big plays, this Somers defense. When I look at Harrison, this defense has been very strong. They've been strong now the last 2 weeks. I know they gave up some big pass plays. A lot of bubble stuff and not tackling in space hurt them at times, but against the run, they were really, really strong. Now, when you look at offensively, they couldn't run the ball efficiently, generating enough movement up front and getting enough yardage. So they had to throw the ball more than they probably wanted to. And unfortunately, you can't turn the ball over. And they did that 3 times. It really put their defense in a bind, who made some huge stops. But again, you have to be able to execute on the offensive side of the ball, passing the ball if the running attack tends to slow down. And sometimes you start to see that when Harrison has to become a throwing team, the offense kind of gets pushed behind the stick. So you got to be able to run the ball. They got to continue to execute, be a little bit more balanced. We'll see. But Harrison's defense was definitely impressive to me. And they took Somers to the wire. The score doesn't indicate that because at the end, Somers kind of pulled away. But this was close for a long time. Let's go to the next game. Huge B matchup. Here we got Rhinebeck at Hen Hud, and Rhinebeck winning 19-12, going to 4-1. And I can't remember the last time Rhinebeck started the season this hot. But Hen Hud was a team that I thought improved. You could see them getting better. They played Nyack really tough the previous week, and they brought that into this game as well. And let's just start with Rhinebeck. Their quarterback Merkel is having a tremendous start to the season, or I would say we're pretty much more than halfway through. He's had a real strong season so far. 3 touchdowns, 2 passing, 1 rushing. Van Ralgen had a receiving touchdown. Spicer had a receiving touchdown. This defense had 2 INTs that were huge for this team. They end up closing the deal, getting another victory, and you never apologize, even if it's a little bit ugly. But they made the plays necessary. Rhinebeck goes to 4-1. Big kudos to Rhinebeck. And when I look at Hen Hud Abound, 5 of 10 passing, had a huge INT, but 122 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. So it's really strong running the ball. Dietz was very strong on the defensive line. He was a very impactful player, 7 tackles and a sack. Sumter had a sack. Nick Basilaya had 6 tackles. I mean, this is a team that you can see them slowly starting to improve, but Ryanek made enough plays offensively that Hen Hunt could not match, and they get the victory to go to 4-1. Let's go to an A matchup. Yorktown at Horace Greeley, and Yorktown winning 48-7 to go to 5-0. And it's been a tremendous start to the season for Yorktown. Greeley drops to 2-3, and I'm going to focus in on Yorktown. Caden Gonzalez, 8 of 14, 158 yards and 4 touchdowns. Again, really strong performance here. And this time, usually we're seeing Yorktown running the ball really well the last couple of weeks. Now with the pass attack hitting some big plays. But Del Vecchio still 73 yards rushing. We have Constantino also had a rushing touchdown. He was an impact player on both sides. Costello, 2 catches, 73 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tyler Galante was another guy you didn't hear a lot about, but he made a big play on both sides of the ball, had a receiving touchdown and INT. Ryan Kane is another one. You see him on the D-line, see him at the wide receiver spot. Multiple weapons. This time he had probably the highlight of the day with a pick 6 on the defensive line, kind of tipped a screen pass to himself for a touchdown and also had a receiving touchdown. Ryan Vogel's another guy. He had a sack, 10 tackles. He's the man leading that charge defensively, but multiple different guys making plays. Yorktown looks to be a very dangerous team. Talked about them in last week's preview. They are one of my favorites so far watching this year. Let's go to another matchup. This is a B matchup here. Pleasantville at Lakeland. I was very intrigued by this matchup here. Pleasantville ends up winning 31-16. And I thought Pleasantville for most of this game really dominated. And again, they were up 24-0 at one point, and they kind of pulled in, put the backups in. Lakeland scored quickly. They put the starters back in. Lakeland scored again. And then Pleasantville kind of controlled the game after that, scoring one last time and kind of putting the nail in the coffin. But offensively, overall, when you look at it, it was a bit mixed. At times, it looked very impressive and explosive. Now, granted, Daniel Picard kicked off the game with a kick return touchdown. So, Lakeland, you're trying to pull the upset. You kick off their best player. He takes it to the house. That's where the momentum was set right from the get-go. But Aiden Picard, he had a passing touchdown, but he also a couple INTs. One of them, not really his fault, bounced right off the receiver. Went to a defender, and that's what I mean where it's mixed. You saw some really nice plays, you saw some bad plays. Coleman, again, had a receiving touchdown, also had a drop. So, again, very mixed. But someone who really did impress me in this one, Louis Sadow on both sides of the ball. He had a rushing touchdown. He was a really strong blocker, as well as Horrigan, blocking up front and creating a rush attack for them. He also had a pick 6, which was a huge momentum shifter for Pleasantville. They got on top of Lakeland really quickly and just, again, kind of shut the door early in this game. Emmett McDermott also had a big INT. This secondary played very strong again. Oregon had a sack. Philip Dundee also made some plays. I know at one point he did get beat for a long touchdown, but I thought he made a couple big plays in the secondary. And again, when Pleasantville is executing, they're very deep. They called a lot of pressure onto Lakeland with their stunting. It put the Lakeland's offense in a real big bind, and they forced a couple turnovers to help set their offense. And when I look at Lakeland, Leonard, when you look at his final stats, like 17 of 32, 205 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 INTs, are not bad. He started off the game very poorly, right? So he was getting flustered from the pressure. He was kind of second-guessing what he was seeing out there, forcing balls that weren't there, a couple turnovers right off the bat. I think it was the first 2 possessions for Lakeland. I think it was a stop, a pick, and then another pick. One of them was for a touchdown. So, again, a really tough start. They started to get more comfortable as the game went along, but it was tough sledding for this offense. Perry ended up having 5 receptions for 40 yards and a touchdown. Kyle Gallagher, I thought he had a strong day. He had over 100 yard receivings on 7 receptions. Also had a pick in this one. DJ Brody also was very, I thought Lakeland's defense made enough plays to keep them in the game on defense. They, didn't give up too much in the rush game. I thought they were going to really struggle stopping Daniel Picard in the run game, but I thought they did a relatively decent job. DJ Brody, I mentioned him, making plays. Ferranti was another guy. He had a sack and 8 tackles. Nick Oliva was another guy who was very active. So, again, unfortunately, the Lakeland offense got off to a very slow. They're going up against a very tough defense, obviously, but got off to a slow start. Lakeland could not rebound. They lose this game. Let's talk about the next one. AA matchup, Arlington at Mount Vernon. Arlington dominating 34-0. And again, let's focus in on Arlington. Resigno, this wasn't his best passing game by any stretch of the imagination. Only completed 4 of 11 passes, but 153 yards and a touchdown. Did have an INT. but he also ran the ball for over 100 yards, 102 yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns. This was a rushing attack that I thought it was going to be a big run game for them, and he had over 100 yards. Davenport had a buck 42 and 2 touchdowns. So a huge rushing performance. Machin had one of the receiving touchdowns on a 94 yards receiving. But to me, what's starting to really impress me, we know about Arlington's offense that's been dominant defensively now. A couple games in a row that they've really shut the door on opposing offenses. Jason Finn is kind of leading the way with tackling. McGann had a sack. Even Resigno had a sack coming off the edge. Cartier Joshua had an INT. Arlington continues to impress. They get a shutout. Here's a B matchup now. We got Rye at Nyack. This is another very interesting one to me, and Rye ends up winning 35-12, going to 3-2. Nyack drops to 2-2, and you wanted to see what Rye was going to do after that tough loss to Pleasantville. They got to deal with a whole bunch of injuries, and AJ Miller was much more efficient. 12 of 16. He did have an INT, but 142 yards and a touchdown, also 27 yards rushing touchdown, and was efficient. Didn't force things as much in this game. Amir White had a rushing touchdown. Chris Luliano had 42 yards rushing in the touchdown. Ramachandram had 82 yards rushing in the touchdown. You could see they were running the ball and dominating up front. 214 yards rushing for this offense. Jack Asiyavadi also was the leading receiver. We've seen that now especially with injuries. He's kind of been the main target for them. He was the receiving end with 80 yards and a touchdown. Also had an INT. But this defense forced 2 turnovers. Welburn had a sack. This was a pretty strong performance, rebounding on the road. Even it was supposed to be a home game, got rained out, had to go to Nyack. It was a nice rebound performance from Rye. And when you look at Nyack, they were able to run the ball pretty effectively against a tough Rye defense. Sean Claremont had 96 yards rushing in the touchdown. Booton had 36 yards. Malachi Pierre had 61 yards rushing. So, again, they did get some rush yards going. I think over 200. But they turned the ball over, which hurt them. Tylen Blackwell had a rushing touchdown. But again, the passing attack, 66 yards passing. So there was a lot of pressure on the quarterback. They did turn the ball over, which hurt them, and they couldn't stop the run on the other end, which was huge for this team. Let's talk about Hudson Valley Football League matchup. We got Walter Panis at Tappan Zee, and Tappan Zee winning 21-0. And Panis' offense continues to struggle, especially missing their best player. And I look at Tappan Zee, I was worried a little bit about their defense. They were starting to give up a lot of big plays. But this was a really nice rebound. Defense getting the shutout, doing enough offensively. Owen O'Hara kind of leading the way. I love how they do their Strong Hat Award. He wins it this past week, but he's kind of been one of the leaders of this team, and he had a strong performance in this game. Let's talk about the next game, AA. Probably one of the best games of the week. Suffern, if you love defense, that is. Suffern at North Rockland. Huge rivalry game here. North Rockland wins 16-0 to go to 4-1, dropping Suffern to 3-1. And this is a non-league game, but a huge rivalry game. And this was that defensive slugfest like I talked about. It was 7-0 at half, 9-0 after 3 quarters. So not a lot of offense, a lot of turnovers, stops, penalties, a lot of physical football. Let's start on the Suffern side, right? Defensively, they forced 2 turnovers. They had 4 fourth-down stops. The defense did a lot to try to keep them in this game. Finnegan Mitchell had 2 INTs, could have had a third INT, but ended up dropping it. But offensively, they just couldn't. They turned the ball over too much. That was a huge factor for them. And also the passing attack. They just couldn't muster enough pass yards and big plays in the passing game. Jet Joseph had over 100 yards rushing. Brady Snell, he had 3 catches for 60 yards, but just not enough. Quarterback Palumbo had 2 big INTs, which really hurt. And they just couldn't effectively, again, there was pressure on the quarterback. Too many turnovers was absolute killer for Suffern. When I look at North Rockland, I mentioned, forced 4 turnovers, had a safety, was huge in this one. And the previous week when they got upset, what a rebound, coming back at home, playing a big-time rivalry, a strong defensive unit. And offensively, if they want to continue to improve and have a chance at competing with the top of the tier and maybe make a push for a potential section title, the passing attack has to get better and the turnovers have to slow down. They turn the ball over way too much. I mentioned 4 fourth-down stops, but again, another 2 interceptions here. And Anthony Hamilton, 9 of 19, hit some big pass plays, but the turnovers and the efficiency has to continue to improve. Now, the offense rushed for 241 yards, right? And it was led by Savor, who was tremendous in this game. 185 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. Vasquez also added another 49 yards rushing. He had 34 yards receiving. Ethan Ferraris had put together a couple of very impressive games recently. He had 4 receptions, 131 yards, 6 tackles. Also had one of the INTs on the turnover. Vate is another guy who's been very active, 15 tackles and an INT. This was a very good rebound game from North Rockland. Suffern's defense really did show up. They gave him some big plays in the run game, and their offense just couldn't get enough in the passing game, but a nice rebound from North Rockland. Let's talk about another double-A matchup, Mamaroneck at White Plains. Mamaroneck winning 35-14. I thought White Plains really competed at home here. They battled, but Mamaroneck proving to be too much, and it's on that back and arm of Henry Mackey, who is leading this charge here. 13 of 18, 193 yards, 3 touchdowns. Did have an INT, but another 110 yards rushing and a touchdown. So 4 touchdowns and over 300 yards from him. He is so important for this offense, the real engine of this offense. Smeel is another guy. We talked about him on previous shows. 4 receptions, 106 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's really kind of the main target in this passing game. He's made some huge plays. But Jack Davidson also made some big plays. He had a touchdown receiving and also a pick 6. This defense forced a couple turnovers. Jack Perowitz had an INT. We know about TJ Smith being very active on the defensive side. Mamaroneck putting together a couple impressive weeks. Had a huge win last week. Continues that trend this week. They don't let up. All right, let's talk about another big matchup, and this is in the A League. Clarkstown South at Mahopac, which was held, at Lakeland. Mahopac ends up winning 20-19. They block an extra point to win the game at the end of this one. But let's start with the losing team in Clarkstown South, and they need to have a kumbaya moment. This is a big turning moment for this team because offensively, they have really been killing themselves. And just think about this. Clarkstown South has given up one on defense. They've given up 1 offensive touchdown the last 2 games, and they're 0-2. And the big thing is turnovers have been killing them, and red zone efficiency has been brutal. And it continued in this game. Offensively, they had 2 turnovers. They had a pick 6 at the end of the half. They got to the red zone, got stopped at the 1-yard line, which ends up being like another turnover. They had an INT when they were driving. So again, offensively, you run a fast-paced, no-huddle offense with a lot of signal and stuff, but you got to execute. You can't turn the ball over, and you got to be able to run the ball and get what I call ugly yards, which is in the red zone. When the space gets smaller, you still got to be able to get those ugly yards. And even when you're passing, you have to make quick decisions and efficient decisions and not forcing things. Right? Because the space is down, you're not going to see guys wide open. You got to be very smart with the football, and that's what they have not been doing the last couple weeks. And special teams also really hurt them. 2 blocked extra points in this one, gave up a kick return touchdown. Defensively, I thought they played well enough. I mean, you didn't allow an offensive touchdown in this game, and you lose. So defensively, I think they played pretty well the last couple weeks, but offensively has really let them down, and it's really cost them. And when I look at Mahopac, right, I mentioned no offensive touchdowns this game. I don't think the offense was very good in this one. It was very inconsistent. At times they were moving, but they got stopped a few times. But Carney was so big for them. He had 2 picks, 1 pick 6 at the end of the half on a reverse pass. That was a busted play. Kid just threw it up, and Carney takes it down the sideline. Also had a kick return touchdown on special teams. Koch had a couple big plays on the offensive side, but he was pretty limited as well running the ball. But Pinto is another one. At special teams, 2 field goals in this one, huge getting points when drives stalled. He also made some big kicks and some big punts that have pinned the team back. Again, those were big, and the offense did not score, and you end up still winning anyway. That's a huge victory by your defense, who did give up some yards and some big plays, but forcing turnovers has been a big topic for this defense. They go to 3-2. Clarkstown South drops to 1-3. Let's talk about the next game, which is a B matchup. Putnam Valley at Briarcliff Hamilton football program. Putnam Valley winning 14-0, and the offense is doing just enough for Put Valley, and it starts with running the ball. Ricky Meister, 12 carries, 177 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Caden Glenn also had 6 carries for 49 yards. They were able to run the ball very effectively. Not a lot of big plays in the passing attack, but it's this defense that's the big story. 6 sacks. They had a forced fumble on the turnover. Nick Mazzolo had 2 sacks and a forced fumble. Jashaj had 2 sacks. This defense has been getting after it, pitching another shutout. Defense has been extremely strong for Put Valley. They go to 3-1. Briarcliff Hamilton football program drops to 1-3. Let's talk about an A matchup. Clarkstown North at Fox Lane. Fox Lane winning 25-14, putting them to 2-2. Clarkstown North goes to 0-4. Clarkstown North, I thought, battled in this one as well. But let's focus in on Fox Lane. Ben Rotolo had 90 yards rushing and a rushing touchdown. It was a really nice boost. Fox Lane was really struggling offensively, trying to find themselves. The quarterback John Zernick had a passing touchdown to Will Rudolph. And to me, it's this offense getting back on track. Defensively, they give up some big plays as well. You want to see them continue to. I thought that's for what they've been stronger at, and you don't want to see them kind of take a step back. But they also dealing with some injuries as well. But Fox Lane making enough plays offensively is the big story in this one. They get back on track. Another really good game, CD matchup, Bronxville at Haldane. Haldane winning 35-27. And Bronxville, again, just this time the offense got off to a fast start defensively. I thought they played really well the last couple weeks, but offensively they just, again, couldn't find the consistency. I thought the offense played pretty good this one, but defensively they gave up a lot of yards rushing, and that really hurt them this week. And looking at Haldane, Evan Gianchinta, 192 yards rushing and a touchdown. He has been an absolute beast, and so is quarterback Van Tassel, who, he didn't pass very well last week, but this week, again, they go over 280 yards rushing, but he also had 3 passing touchdowns. He was 13-17, 131 yards, 3 pass touchdowns, also 90 yards rushing, and a touchdown from him. Michael Murray was unguardable with 10 receptions, 107 yards, and a receiving touchdown. Brady Corliss had a receiving touchdown. Tippett had a receiving touchdown. Filet Faye had an INT in by the end zone, which again is in an 8-point game is huge, right? So Haldane gets to 4-0. Really, really strong start to the season for Haldane. Let's talk about the next matchup. Albertus Magnus at Hastings is a non-league game. Hastings winning 20-14, getting their first victory of the year. And focusing in on Hastings, Keith Capuano, we know about a big-time player he is. He had a receiving touchdown and a sack. But it's all the plays that Keith Capuano didn't have to make, which was big. They had another passing touchdown, another rushing touchdown. You're seeing other players make big plays for them. They were up 20-0 after the first quarter, got off to such a big start. Then things started to start chipping away at them. So they hold off just enough defensively to win it. Offense couldn't get going really much after that. But Hastings gets the victory, get off to their fast start in that first quarter, which really held up in the end. Let's go to the next game, Byram Hills at Irvington. And Byram Hills really trying to get back on track. They do, winning 42-14, getting back to 2-2. Irvington drops to 0-4. They were up 35-0 in half. And boy, there was the balanced attack on this one. They had ran the ball. Weiler had a rushing touchdown. Weiss had a rushing touchdown. Burfield had a rushing touchdown. And multiple guys starting to make plays. It didn't feel like it's all on their quarterback. But Accurso, he had 3 passing touchdowns. 2 of them to Tyler Marscott. 1 of them to Machucci. Had a receiving touchdown as well. But seeing Byram Hills show some balance was huge. And then all the pressure putting on their quarterback, which tends to force things defensively. Again, really strong at the half. They give up a couple touchdowns in the second half, but up 35-0. They probably pulled back the reins a little bit. Let's go to the next game. A matchup, Pelham at John Jay Cross River. John Jay Cross River running 15-9. Pelham dropping to 0-4. John Jay Cross River getting to 2-2. This was a non-league game. Pelham was down 15-0, and then they scored 9 unanswered points in the fourth. Couldn't get enough to get over the top. John Jay Cross River holds on. And when I look at Cross River offensively, the pass attack still continues to struggle. I'm trying to get some consistency there, but they ran for 282 yards, which was huge. And it was multiple guys. That quarterback Machado had 87 yards rushing. Luca Duva had 123. Savastano also had 50 yards rushing. So multiple guys making big plays for them. And defensively, they held on. It was 15-0. They did give up 9 points, but again, this defense, they're not very big, but they swarmed to the football. Camero helped leading the way with 6 tackles. They had forced a couple turnovers as well. Macrolisi had an INT. Maddock had an INT. So they do enough here to get back on track. Offensively, ran the ball very well. They still got to figure things out in the pass game for some more consistency. Those guys up front is going to be huge for John Jay Cross River to continue to win. Let's keep going, guys. Hudson Valley Football League matchup, Poughkeepsie at Peekskill, and Peekskill winning 42-6, pushing them to 3-1. Poughkeepsie dropping to 1-4, and now Peekskill with 30-plus points in 3 straight games, and the defense still holding teams to under 10 points now, and also 3 straight games. So this Peekskill team is starting to really boost up themselves. They've been really impressive now on both sides of the ball, having complete performances now for multiple weeks in a row. Really been impressed with Peekskill. Let's talk about the next matchup, Double A matchup. John Jay's Fishkill at Yonkers Forest was one of the more intriguing ones that I wanted to see. John Jay's Fishkill winning 35-19. You want to see if East Fishkill could have rebounded, and they did. And they really struggled to run the ball last week, but not this time around. Evan Rossi had 163 yards rushing. Feliciano had 120 total yards and 3 touchdowns. But again, it was other guys making plays outside of Feliciano, which is so important. Caliani had 66 yards rushing, touchdown. Crouch had 54 yards rushing and a touchdown. This offense had 428 yards total. And defensively, did give up some big pass plays, but they made enough plays. Vinny Agliotti had 2 forced fumbles. They held Yonkers Forest from running the ball very well in this one, even though they gave up some big pass plays, and it's enough to win in this one. I'm going to look at Yonkers Forest. I mentioned struggled to run the ball, but Nazir Fields, 2 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. He was strong in this game. Angel Aquino, he's, again, a big play threat. He had another big performance this week with over 100 yards and a receiving touchdown, but not enough. On defense, they couldn't slow down the run, and John Jay's Fishkill really took advantage of that. One of the best games of the week was this next one. CD matchup, Westlake at Tuckahoe, and Westlake winning 35-34. 2 strong fronts going at it. Back and forth game. Looked like Westlake was going to pull away. Tuckahoe comes climbing back. This was a really good game, and I'm going to start with Westlake. Jack Zino had a rushing touchdown. He also had a game-sealing INT towards the end of the game. And you're going to see what I like about Westlake, multiple guys making plays. I mentioned Zino there. DiNapoli had a long touchdown run. Chris Callie, he also had another touchdown. He's a big play threat for them. He's been pretty dominant all season long. Pagan had a rushing touchdown. You can see multiple different guys scoring. CJ Prosperino is another guy. Now, the last couple weeks, making plays, had another INT in this one. Nick Castellano is another guy I saw pop up on screen multiple times watching this game. And again, they stop Tuckahoe on a 2-point play, get enough for the victory. And when I look at Tuckahoe, this was a really tough loss at home, but they found they were climbing their way back, couldn't do the complete comeback there. Towards the end, it was, I think, 28-14 at one point. But Jax Colachicho, he has been so impressive. 26 of 33, 317 yards passing, 3 touchdowns. Did have 2 INTs, which were killers, but he also had 62 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns. Had 5 touchdowns for his team and over 379 yards. Offensively, they had over 400 yards total. Huge production, and it was multiple guys also. This is a dangerous pass attack. Banky had 11 receptions for 93 yards on the touchdown. Bryce had a touchdown reception, also 2 fumble recoveries. This defense gave up a lot of big plays, but did force a couple turnovers to give themselves a chance. Jacob Liberati had a receiving touchdown, 6 tackles. And up front, again, these were 2 strong fronts going at it. Bartolini was pretty impactful. He had 7 tackles up front, but not enough for Tuckahoe to come back. They dropped to 2-2. Westlake goes to 3-0. Let's talk about a double A matchup. 2 teams trying to get their first victory. RCK at Yonkers Brave. And RCK winning 31-6 in very impressive fashion. And looking at RCK, it was this offensive line that really dominated and pushed things going forward. Their running back in Eaglet had 3 rushing touchdowns. Dylan Fay had a rushing touchdowns. 4 rushing touchdowns. And it's really behind that offensive line that dominated up front. Yonkers Brave could not defend against them. Next matchup, double A matchup, New Rochelle at Scarsdale. Big rivalry game here, league matchup. And New Rochelle won 21-20. A really nice rebound from New Rochelle coming off a loss. It was on the road. Scarsdale was really humming. Defensively was playing really strong. But I tell you what, New Rochelle forced a big-time turnover off of a sack. They also had a huge touchdown off a pass play on a kind of a post route. And they got out on the edge. And the big question was, offensively, can they generate enough big plays? And they did in this one. And this defense, I thought, has been the most consistent unit for them. Held up just enough. Now, they did give up some big plays in play action, but made enough plays in this one. The offense hit some big plays, got out on the edge, and it was enough for New Rochelle to win. And Knopp on the other end on Scarsdale had a huge receiving touchdown. He's been a big play guy for them offensively. Play action was really working at times for them, but turnover is a huge factor. And Scarsdale just couldn't, that was a big thing I talked in the preview, preventing big plays. Right? Don't let New Rochelle get on the edge. Don't give up those big, long touchdowns. They did in this one, and that's what hurt Scarsdale big time. Let's get to the next game. B matchup, Nanuet at Edgemont, and Nanuet winning 26-0, going to 3-1. Edgemont dropping to 1-2, and I'm going to focus in on Nanuet. Offensively, they're doing, again, just enough. You talk about Stemmerman. 89 yards and 3 touchdowns. Evan Moran at 57 yards and a touchdown. Those two you've seen now the last couple of weeks, making some big-time plays, but it's this defense. Another shutout. They have been very stout, very scrappy, very strong. Mike Cesario, 12 tackles and an INT, helped leading the way. Shane O'Neal, now you've seen him a couple times, 7 tackles and a sack. Nanuet's defense has been kind of the engine of this team. They're doing enough offensively. Running the ball, playing good defense is leading to a lot of success going to 3-1. Probably the next one of the better matchups, again, big-time rivalry game in this C matchup. Valhalla at Dobbs Ferry, and Valhalla winning 27-26. A great game between these two very evenly matched teams. And Valhalla stuffed a 2-point attempt at the end for Dobbs Ferry to take the lead with 48 seconds to win this game. And Valhalla's defense, they forced 2 turnovers defensively that led to touchdowns. And they're really being led by their running back, Rob Forsett. 17 carries, 142 yards behind this offensive line. Hard-nosed running. He had 2 touchdowns, also had an INT on defense. Luke Forsett also had an INT. He was very active defensively. But Valhalla, they're running the ball, mixing it up with some of the pass stack off of play action. They can beat you multiple ways, but I love the physicality that they play defensively. And they're showing that physicality up front against a very scrappy, strong, not very large, but stout Dobbs Ferry front. This game proved a lot to me from Valhalla. When I look at Dobbs Ferry, Kevin Harnett was pretty efficient. 11-15 for 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. 2 INTs were pretty big. Also had a bunch of rushing yards in this one. But Cameron Holman is a guy who's been very impressive for Dobbs Ferry. Look for him to continue. 54 yards rushing, 39 yards receiving, had a receiving touchdown. Defensively, giving up a lot of rush yards on this one, which was a little concerning for Dobbs Ferry, which is very they get after the football very well. They're pretty stout. Valhalla was able to run the ball, which was a huge difference in this one. Finally, to wrap it all off, Hudson Valley Football League matchup, Portchester at Spring Valley. Spring Valley winning 38-0. And this was a dominant performance by Spring Valley. You can see starting to get better. Big question with Spring Valley. We know they bring it defensively. They put a lot of pressure on you. They forced a bunch of turnovers so far this year. But offensively, what can they do? And boy, did their quarterback, Kevin Dessalines, have a big-time game in this one. 7-11 passing, 138 yards, 2 touchdowns, also 106 yards rushing, and 4 touchdowns in this one. So, again, big-time performance. 3 touchdowns, I believe. So he had 5 total touchdowns. He also had an INT on defense. So you're looking at this. Can Spring Valley find the consistency offensively? They like to get out on the edge. This was a big-time performance by their quarterback. Shout out to Spring Valley. Whew. All right, guys, that was it. We went through all the games, gave kind of the breakdown. Again, appreciate you guys as always. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We will have those rankings out for you as well. So stay tuned, and we'll see you all very soon.